You before that Julie and I started dating when we were in college. And that first year we were dating, we dated for, well, since about March, April. And but then it came time for the summer. And I went home for the summer and Julie went all over the world. She went on like 2 different mission trips and she went and worked at a camp. But all that to say, I only got to talk to her 2 times that entire summer. And they were really towards the beginning of summer. And so when it came time for me to go back to school, I packed up all my stuff, I went back to school, and I was really excited about seeing her. I hadn't talked to her in months, I hadn't seen her in even more months, and I was really excited to see her. But I was also a little nervous, a little apprehensive. You know why? Because I hadn't talked to her in months, and I didn't know, will she still feel the same? Or would she have decided that I'm not really that special? But would she still feel? And I have to admit, I was so excited, but I was a little nervous. I was glad to see that she was glad to see me as well. So anyway, but, they say absence makes the heart grow fonder. And that can be true. But I've also seen, and I also know to be true, that sometimes absence can make the heart wander. And this is true in our human relationships. It's also true of our relationship with God. Relationships have to be held tightly. They have to be cultivated. And when there are obstacles to relationships, whether we're talking, again, human relationships or our relationship with God, when there are obstacles to it, we must find ways to overcome them, ways to grow fonder, ways for our relationship to grow stronger rather than wander. And this is the concern that is found in our passage today. The concern that they would maintain a right relationship with God, that they would maintain good fellowship with God, in order to be able to continue to connect with Him, to worship Him, and to live as His people. And so as life happens and situations change, the question is, are you making the right choices, or making choices that will make your heart for God grow fonder, that will make your passion for God grow stronger? Or are you making choices that will allow or even cause your heart to wander? So this is what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to begin here in chapter 22, verse 1. Verses 1 through 9 to begin with. It says, at that time Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as He promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. Only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all His ways, and to keep His commandments, and to cling to Him, and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. Now to the one half of the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, but to the other half, Joshua had given a possession besides their brothers in the land in the land west of the Jordan. And when Joshua sent them away to their homes and blessed them, he said to them, go back to your tents with much wealth and with very much livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and with much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers. So the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned home, parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, their own land, of which they had possessed themselves by command of the Lord through Moses. And so we come to this time, the conquest is basically finished. The people of Israel are in the land. Much of it has been settled, and the people of Israel are stable. Now, as we talked about last week, there are still some areas where there are pockets where there's still some people in the land and some enemies. There's still some people to be conquered and places to be conquered. But for the most part, the conquest is done and the people are in the land and stable. The majority of the fighting is done. And so Joshua at this point calls together the 2.5 tribes that had settled on the east side of the Jordan. Now, if you remember this from our study in Numbers, what had happened is they had come into that area on the east of the Jordan, and they had been attacked by a couple kings in that area, but God gave them the victory over those kings. And the people of these 2.5 tribes who had a lot of livestock looked around and said, this is really good pasture land. Can we settle here? And after getting over the misunderstandings and sorting through things, Moses said, yes, you can, but you need to come and fight with your brothers. In other words, you need to come and be a support to the rest of your relatives, to the Israelites, as they go in and take this land that God is giving them. So this is what they had promised, and this is what they had done. So at this point, they had fulfilled their promise. And Joshua is praising them for that. Because if you think about this, what did they do? I mean, think about this commitment that they made. Think about the sacrifice that they made. They had been fighting for years. We know from Caleb's age, we saw back in chapter 14, from Caleb's age, they had been in the land fighting for at least 7 years. And so here these people had made this commitment, we will fight for brothers. And so they've been there for 7 years. Now, it's possible that they got to go home like in the winter, because at that time people fought at certain times of the year where it was easier and more convenient. But it's possible they went home during those times. And it's possible some men got too old and stayed home, and some maybe younger men got young or grew up old enough to go out and fight. And so there may have been some changeover. But for 7 years, these people had been away from home fighting with the rest of Israel to take the land. But at this point, now the land is secure. Israel is secure in their land. And so the people of those 2.5 tribes, of the eastern tribes, are free to go home to their families on the other side of the river. And at this point, Joshua blesses them and sends them home. Now, we don't know exactly what blessing he gives them, but when it says he blesses them, it's more than just simply saying, thanks, and you can go. But he's thanking them, and he's actually saying, may God bless you. And it's not just a greeting. He's meaning, may God bless you, give you good things, provide for you, take care of you. So he blesses them and sends them home. But then he tells them one other thing. He says, I want you to take all the plunder that you've gathered from the battles and take it with you and divide it with your brothers. In other words, he's saying, go and share it with your relatives who are at home. Now you may be asking, wait a minute, who's at home for them to share with? Who's there? Well, the thing is that when people went off to battle, they left their wives and their children there. They left their livestock and their homes there. Some people had to stay home in order to protect the families, the people who were there, and their stuff. So some people went off to battle and some stayed there in the land. And so when he tells them, go and split up the plunder, share their wealth with them, that's who he's talking to. You go and you share that with all those people at home. Now, why would they do this? I mean, why share? And you can imagine saying, wait a minute, we're the ones that went and fought. We're the ones that sacrificed. We were the ones that were gone for these 7 years or more fighting. Why would we take it and share with those people who stayed at home? Well, the answer is very simple. Because both people, whether they had gone to war or whether they stayed home, both were fulfilling a very important and necessary task. Those who stayed home were taking care of the homes and protecting the homes and protecting their people, their families. And so they were both doing a very important task. Both had necessary obligations. And so he says, take this home and you share it with everyone. Now I want us to look back at at verse 5 and take a closer look at verse 5. Because as Joshua sends these people home, he does more than just simply say, okay, we're done, you can go. But he gives them a challenge. He exhorts them about the very most important thing that they can do now as they leave. So verse 5 again, it said, only be very careful to observe the commandments and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cling to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. This challenge here starts with the word only. And when he says only here, he's basically stopping in his tracks. They're stopping the people in their tracks, because he says, you can go home, but... So he's about to give them a restriction or a limitation. You can go, but only be very careful, he says. He says, only be very careful. In other words, you can go, but make absolutely sure of this one thing. He's telling them to be very careful. And when he's telling them, he's basically saying, you're on guard duty. I know some of you have actually literally been on guard duty. And when you're on guard duty, what are you doing? You're guarding something. You're either keeping people out or keeping people in, or you're watching over, you're protecting something or someone. You're on guard duty. And this is the idea here. He says, only be very careful. Only be on your guard. Watch out. But what is it that they are guarding? What is it that you're watching? Yourself. He says, watch for yourself, that you are doing what is right. But he says, be very careful. Be careful to do what? And in general, he's saying to remain faithful to God. But he expresses this in 6 specific ways. So be very careful, first of all, to observe the commandments and the law. And when he says to observe the commandments and the law, what he's saying is to be very careful to do them. To do what is written in the commandments, to do what is in God's law. See, because observe means more than just take notice of something or know about it. But observe has the idea of knowing and then doing. In order to do it, you have to know, but knowing is not enough. You know it and you do it. So be very careful to do all that is commanded in God's law. Secondly, he says to be very careful to love Yahweh, or to love God. And this means just that. Be very careful to have affection and be devoted to God. Thirdly, he tells them, be very careful to walk in all his ways. To walk in all his ways. Now, there's a picture here. When he says walk in all his ways, it's kind of like a picture of walking down paths. You know, if you've ever gone hiking and there's this trail you could take or this trail you could take, and you know, sometimes you'll look at a path and you're like, hey, that looks like a good path, and you go about 10 feet and realize it's stopped because it's all overgrown or whatever. Or this one looks good and you go about 15 feet and there's a cliff and you're like, oh, those aren't good paths. All right? And sometimes when you go out hiking, maybe you have a map that'll tell you where to take, what trails to take, what's a good path and what is not a good path. Or sometimes you might have a guide who then goes with you and you follow them down the good paths, down the good places. This is the picture here. He says, be very careful that you walk in all his ways. Walk in his paths. Walk in God's paths. Walk in the ways that God would walk, the way he would have you to walk. So when he says this, make sure, be very careful to walk in all his ways. He's saying walk or live in his way. Walk on his paths, the way he would go. So follow his guidance and follow his ways and walk those ways. And one other thing, he says to walk in how many of his ways? All his ways. So that means in every situation, no matter what you're doing in life or where you're headed, walk in God's ways. Live his way. No matter what is going on in life, you walk in all his ways. Fourthly, he tells them, be very careful to keep his commandments. Now, this is pretty much the same as the first one, right? He's repeating himself. He's using different words, but he's repeating himself. And if he's repeating himself, it must be a very important thing for us to hear. Or maybe it's something that we struggle to do. to be obedient, to obey his commandments. So he tells us again to obey. And fifthly, he says, be very careful to cling to God. To cling to him, to follow closely after him, to stick with him. Now, as a parent, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, as a parent or even a grandparent, you maybe spend some time with your kid or your grandkid, and then you go out and you go to the bank and you go to the store, or you go to an important meeting, and all of a sudden you look down and you realize you have stickers on you. It happens, right? And you look and you're like, oh man, where have I gone with all these stickers on me? What is that? They're stuck to you. They were with you everywhere you went. All right? Well, let me give you another illustration of this idea of sticking with God. When Michael was little, he would run over and he would grab a hold of my leg and not let me go. And it was a game for him. He would cling to my leg and he wouldn't let me go, to where the point where I would start walking. And he was a heavy kid, by the way. And I would start walking. And eventually he'd be sitting on my foot, holding tightly to my leg, not letting me go. And this is what I think of here. He's saying, cling to God. Cling so tightly to him that wherever he goes, you're going to go with him. Cling tightly to him, hold tightly to him, so you don't let him go. In other words, don't allow anything to come in between you. Don't allow anything to separate you. Cling tightly to him. So he says, be very careful to cling to God. And then sixth, he says, be very careful to serve God, to work for him, to do his will, to do whatever he wants you to do. But then he adds this, how do we do this? How do we go about serving him? He says, with all your heart and with all your soul. In other words, with all that you are, put everything into it. Put all that you have into it. Now, does this sound familiar? It sounds a lot like the Great Commandment, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength. In other words, love him, serve him with everything that you are and everything you've got. Put your all into it. Now, Joshua gave them this charge as they were about to leave, and he may be simply giving them this charge as a leader, saying, okay, you're about to separate, and let me just tell you what you should do. But you almost get the impression that he may be concerned that they won't be faithful to God. I mean, if you think about it, they're going to live so far away. And not only that, but they're going to be separated from the rest of the community. There's going to be an actual natural barrier between them, a river that you have to cross in order to interact. So they're going to be separated. They're going to be cut off from the rest of the community, cut off from their encouragement and cut off from their accountability. And so maybe he's a little concerned. It almost feels like a parent who is sending their child off, like maybe to the first year of college or they're moving or something, and they're saying, be careful what you do and the choices you make. Be careful that you maintain, that you go to church. Be careful that you find a place to worship. Be careful that you stay faithful to God. But this is what Joshua says. He says, do this. And he lists off these things. Do these things. And the thing is if we were to do these things that Joshua listed off, those 6 things, to observe the commandments and to love God and to walk in all his ways and keep his commandments and cling to God and serve him, if we do these things, though no matter where we go or no matter what situation we find ourselves in, it won't leave much of a chance for wandering. If you commit yourself to these things, it doesn't leave much room for wandering. But it will cause you to grow fonder of God. And it will cause your relationship with God to grow stronger. So he gives them this charge, but what do you think the eastern tribes will do? Let's read. Verse 10. He says, and when they came to the region of the Jordan that is in the land of Canaan, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size. So they're leaving, and when they get to the Jordan, they build this really big altar. In fact, it's so big that it can be seen from far away. And it says it's imposing. In other words, it almost sounds like it's outlandish. It's just like, look at that thing. You can't help but notice it. And so it's this really big altar. Now, we're not told here, at least not yet, why they built it. But the reason for that is because the rest of Israel doesn't know why they built it yet either. But you can imagine that what the rest of Israel might think when they see this. If you think about things, see, why were altars built in that time period? For worship. Either the worship of the true God or false gods. Okay? And so altars were built for worship. And they built, here it is, this big altar. But the thing is God had given Israel an altar at the tabernacle. And he had told them how to worship him, how to approach him. And but now, here's this other altar in Israel's land. And it's really big. And you can imagine the people of Israel start wondering, what's that altar for? Is it to a different God? And look how big it is. Are they suggesting that it's for, maybe suggesting superiority? Is it to a better God? Which we know isn't true or is impossible. But what are they doing? Why did they build this? And you might wonder, is this exactly what Joshua may have been concerned about? And the people start wondering what happens. So what does the nine and a half tribes, the western tribes, do? Look at verse 11. It says, and the people of Israel heard it and said, behold, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh have built the altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. Then the people of Israel... let me keep reading. Then the people of Israel, verse 13, of Israel sent to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and went with him 10 chiefs, one from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them the head of a family among the clans of Israel. And so here's what happened. Someone sees it. Of course, it was really big, so it couldn't be missed. But someone sees it, and the people of Israel start talking about it. And they're not very happy about it because they're like, this is wrong. They should not have built this altar here. And so they all kind of get together to discuss it. Well, actually, they get together because they're ready to go to war with their relatives. Because they're saying, we need to go out and we need to cleanse the sin from our land. And so they make this assumption about what they're doing, and they say, we need to go out and take care of this. And they're ready to go to battle. But before they go to battle, they send this delegation, which I think is good. Talk first before you go to battle. And so here they are. So they send this delegation, and they send 10 leaders, one from each of the tribes that are on the western side, from the 9.5 tribes on the western side of the Jordan. And they're led by an 11th person, the Phinehas, the priest. Now, we've met him before, and it makes sense that he would go and he would lead this congregation or this delegation. Because, for one, this is a spiritual matter, so there's a spiritual leader sent to head up the delegation or the discussion. And secondly, Phinehas is already known for his passion for God and his passion for the purity of God's worship. If you remember, if you were with us when we studied Numbers, again, you'll remember the story of the Moabites and the Midianites, how they wanted to attack Israel, and they hired Balaam, and God didn't let him curse them. He actually made them bless them, and so they knew they couldn't fight them and win. And so the Midianites and the Moabites decided to take a different tact. Well, we'll just deceive them, and we'll just trick them into following our God, and then they won't have their strength because their God won't help them anymore. And so the women of these people seduced the Israelite men. And then after seducing them into relationships with them, they brought them in and said, come worship with us. And they took them and they started worshiping their false gods. And so they seduced them into idolatry. But in the end of that story, we have Phinehas is there with all the people of Israel, the faithful of Israel, standing around the tabernacle. And God had just told them, you need to go out and you need to put to death these idolaters and cleanse the camp. And as they're talking and as they're weeping before God because of what has to be done and because what has happened, this one Israelite man comes into the camp and he's bringing with him a Moabite woman. And they walk right past the people, right past the tabernacle, and go on into his tent. And Phinehas sees a spear, takes the spear and walks into the tent and puts the spear through those two while they're in their act of sin. Phinehas had a zeal for God, a passion for God, and for the purity of his people and the purity of his worship. So this is Phinehas who is being sent here on this delegation. He's passionate about being faithful to God, and he is a proven leader in such matters. Let's keep reading in verse 15. It says, and they came to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, and they said to them, thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this breach of faith that you have committed against God, the God of Israel, in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourself an altar this day in rebellion against the Lord? Have we not had enough of the sin of Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which there came a plague upon the congregation of the Lord, that you too must turn away this day from following the Lord? And if you too rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. So they get there and they immediately start making accusations. Why have you done this? Why you've been unfaithful to God? Why have you turned away from God? And they're actually kind of a little harsh here about it too. I mean, they haven't stopped to ask, what did you do, or why did you build this? Or they basically said, why have you turned away from God? Why have you rebelled? And they're a little harsh in their accusation. But they do this. They just accuse them of rebelling against God. And they equate what the people of the eastern tribes have done, they equate it with that situation at Peor, what I just talked about, with the Midianites and being seduced and the Israelites going into idolatry. And he says, didn't we have enough of this? And he basically says, why would you go there again? He says, wasn't it bad enough the first time? I mean, this was a great sin and 24,000 Israelites died. And he makes this comment. He says, we haven't even yet completely cleansed ourselves from that situation, which suggests that there's still some consequences being felt from that rebellion, from that judgment that God brought him. Or maybe there are some who are still being drawn or tempted to fall into that idolatry, that evil idolatry. But he says, just like before, this sin of idolatry will bring God's judgment, not just on a few people, but on all of Israel. He says, we are a covenant community, and it will bring his judgment on all of us. But catch this in the next verses. In the middle of this stern rebuke and this warning, they extend a gracious offer. Look at verse 19. It says, but now, if the land of your possession is unclean, pass over into the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take for yourself a possession among us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, or make us as rebels by building for yourself an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God. Did not Achan, the son of Zerah, break faith in the matter of the devoted things? And the wrath fell upon all the congregation of Israel, and he did not perish alone for this iniquity. So it starts with, they come to him and they make this assumption that the people of the East are rebelling against God and that they have defiled their land with idolatry. But in the middle of this accusation, they give them this offer. They give the faithful of those tribes an opportunity to separate themselves from the sinful idolatry and the sinfulness of the land, and to come over and live within their own land. Now, you need to catch what they're doing here. They're actually offering to give up some of their own land so the other people could come in and live in the land of God, and to live in a relationship faithful to God. See, because they had divided up the land into inheritances. And what they're saying is, if your land is defiled, if your land is filthy with idolatry, come over into ours. You can have some of our land. Come live with us. And so they are offering to give of themselves, to sacrifice of their own in order to help others in the community remain faithful to God. Now that's a pretty awesome love. That's a pretty awesome commitment to others. But that's what they're doing. They're offering that to these people. They're offering grace and saying, come on, come into our land and stay with us. And I think this is a great reminder for us in this story to be passionate about the purity of our faith, to be passionate about the purity of God's worship, to be passionate about being faithful to God, but also to be gracious and even give of yourself in the process of helping people remain faithful to God. Well, at this point now, finally the eastern tribes have a chance to give an answer and to explain what they did and why they did it. So look at verse 21 through 23. Then the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh said in answer to the heads of the families of Israel, "The mighty one, God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord, He knows, and let Israel itself know. If it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today for building an altar to turn away from following the Lord. Or if we did so to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it, may the Lord Himself take vengeance." This is their response. They start with a passionate response of their own. The people of Israel have come and made a passionate accusation, and the people of the eastern tribe make a passionate defense. And they start out by calling out God's name. But they tell them, we did not do this out of rebellion. This altar has not been built for making offerings or sacrifices or for worship of Yahweh or any God. But like I said, they start here by by declaring the name of God, and they call on Him as a witness. And they use these three names of God. In the Hebrew, it's actually El, Elohim, Yahweh. And they call out these three names of God. And they're making a big deal on His name. And they say, He knows. You see, they understand the problem here. And they understand how big of a deal this would be for them to rebel against God that way. And they also agree with the Western tribes that if they did this, that they would deserve to die. But they say, God knows. He knows what we did, and He knows why we did it. He knows our hearts. He knows our motives. And He says, and if we have rebelled against God, let Him put us to death. So now we know why that they didn't build it for worship. So why did they build it? Keep reading verse 24. It says, now, but we did it from fear that in time to come your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You people of Reuben and the people of Gad, you have no portion in the Lord, so your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now build an altar, not for burnt offering, not for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in His presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. And we thought, if this should be said to us or to our descendants in time to come, we should say, behold, the copy of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings, not for sacrifices, but to be a witness between us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, or sacrifice, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before His tabernacle. They basically say, why did we build this? Because it's a replica. It's a copy. It's a monument. Now, imagine for a minute what these men might have been thinking after years of fighting side by side with the rest of Israel, with their relatives on the western side. After years of this close fellowship, of working together and doing these things together, they head home. And as they're getting home, they get to the river. And all of a sudden they start feeling a little anxious, a little unsure, a little apprehensive. Because they think about this, as soon as we cross over this river, we're going to be separated. There's going to be a distance between us. We're going to be cut off from the rest of our people. There's going to be a barrier between us. And they felt uncomfortable and they felt concerned. And they thought, well, because we're far away and because there's limited interaction between us, it's possible that one day they may cut us off from the covenant community. They may cut us off from the worship of God. They may say, you have no part in Yahweh. You are not part of this covenant community. You don't belong to God. And so they built this monument. They built this replica as evidence that they served the same God. And they say, look, it looks the same as the real altar, but it's bigger. But it's just there to remind us that we worship there at the true altar of God at the tabernacle as well. So basically you're telling, they didn't do this out of rebellion, but they did this out of passionate commitment to God. Because they didn't want to be cut off from God. They didn't want to be separated from Him or the community. So they did what they thought was necessary to stay close to God, to remain in the covenant community. Well, verse 30 says, when Phinehas the priest and the chiefs of the congregation, the heads of the families of Israel who were with him, heard the words that the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh spoke, it was good in their eyes. And Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest said to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. Now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. Then Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest and the chiefs returned from the people of Reuben and the people of Gad in the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan and to the people of Israel, and brought back word to them. And the report was good in the eyes of the people and of Israel. And the people of Israel blessed God and spoke no more of making war against them to destroy the land where the people of Reuben and the people of Gad were settled. The people of Reuben and the people of Gad called the altar witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. So when the people give their explanation, you can just sense this corporate sigh of relief. Everyone says, oh good. We're so glad that you're not rebelling against God, and we're glad that judgment isn't going to be coming from God upon all of us. But they say, oh good. They're really glad about these things. And so they go home and they report this to the rest of Israel, and they decide, okay, that's good, and there's no need for them to go to war to deal with any sin. And we're told here at the end that the altar they gave the altar a name because it was a witness. It stood as a witness that testified that Yahweh is God, and that the people of Israel on the east side and the west side both worship the same God. Now, I think this was a good resolution in the end. And when I say that, I mean that in two ways. First of all, it was a good outcome. Everything worked out. Now, you can ask questions about, did the people really need to build that altar? And probably not. But everything worked out at the end. There was no war and no one had rebelled against God. But it was also a good resolution in that those people, they were resolved. They were all very resolved to be faithful to God. They were resolved to continue to worship and serve God. They were resolved to overcome any potential obstacles or any potential barriers to their fellowship with God. And for us, you may experience changes in life. You may move away or move here. You may get a new job. You may get a new home. You may end up being something happening to where you are a distance away from your support, your spiritual support. But But whatever comes your way, you need to resolve to do what is necessary to cling to God rather than wander. Whatever happens in life, we can be resolved to cling to our God. That means you can go. You can leave this place, or you can go to a new home, or you can move away, or you can go about your life. Whatever you do, you can go. But in the words of Joshua, you can go. Only be very careful. Be very careful to love your God. Be very careful to obey your God. Be very careful to follow and cling to your God. Only be very careful.